It was a gray morning in Providence. Rain had just stopped, leaving the courthouse steps slick and glistening. Inside the small courtroom, the fluorescent lights flickered faintly above a line of people waiting their turn. Among them sat a man in his 60s, hunched forward, his hands folded in his lap. He wore a denim jacket that had seen better years and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. The rim was frayed, and the color had faded into something between sky and dust. He didn't look up, just sat quietly, eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor like he was counting something invisible. From the row behind him, someone whispered, "Is that Rick Harrison?" A second voice, hushed but sharp, replied, "No way, that can't be him. Looks like a guy who's been sleeping under the bridge." A soft chuckle followed, quickly silenced when the clerk called out, "Rick Harrison, please step forward." The man stood, slowly. His gait was steady, though there was a tiredness to it, a weight that seemed to press down on each step. He approached the bench without looking left or right, not acknowledging the stairs that trailed behind him like shadows. Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses and studied the man in front of him. "Mr. Harrison, you're here today for 7 violations, including 5 unpaid parking tickets. Do you have any ability to pay the fine?" Rick lifted his eyes, just enough to meet the judge's gaze. "I have 92 cents in my account," he said, his voice quiet but firm. There was no embarrassment in his tone, just a matter-of-fact honesty. A few heads turned. The courtroom stilled. Judge Caprio tilted his head. 92 cents? "Yes, sir." The judge leaned back slightly. "And how did you get here today?" "I walked." "You walked?" "From East Providence," Rick added. "Took me a little over an hour." Caprio blinked. "That's more than 5 miles. Why not take a cab or drive?" There was a pause. Rick looked down at his hands, then back up. "I sold my car," he said. "It was the last real thing I owned." The judge waited. Rick's voice softened. "I needed money for my mother's medication. She's in a wheelchair now. Doesn't leave the house much. I couldn't let her go without it." You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing above. That was all. No more laughter from the benches behind. No more whispers. Rick wasn't trying to make a speech. He wasn't looking for pity. He was just telling the truth the way a man does when there's nothing left to lose. Caprio's expression shifted, barely, but noticeably. His usual warm eyes grew more focused. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly in his chair. His tone remained calm, but his eyes carried a quiet curiosity. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "what did you used to do for a living?" Rick didn't answer right away. He reached up slowly and pulled off his cap. Beneath it was a head of thinning hair, streaked with silver. The kind of gray that doesn't just come with age, but with wear. The kind that life paints on after years of trying. "I used to run a pawn shop," Rick began, his voice even but heavy with the weight of memory. "In Las Vegas. It wasn't just any shop, it was my life's work. At its peak, it was worth millions. We had a television show too, Pawn Stars. Maybe you've heard of it." There was a small ripple in the courtroom. A few turned their heads. Recognition settled softly on some faces, like a name remembered from long ago. "I was on TV every week," Rick continued. "Back when I thought life had a rhythm. Back when I believed the ground under my feet would always be steady." Judge Caprio gave a gentle nod. "I thought you looked familiar." Rick smiled faintly, but it flickered and fell away just as quickly. The cameras showed the storefront, the jokes, the deals. But what they didn't show was what I didn't see either, what was happening behind my back. He looked down for a moment, his fingers brushing the edge of the podium. "I trusted the people closest to me, my wife, my best friend. I thought they were looking out for me, for the business. I had no idea they were quietly undoing everything I built." The courtroom was quiet now. Even the air seemed to hold still. "They rerouted accounts, signed papers in my name. I was too busy trying to keep up, filming, meeting people, managing the store. They gave me things to sign, and I did. I didn't ask. I didn't want to believe they could betray me like that." His voice grew softer. "By the time the IRS showed up, it was too late. Everything was in my name. All the documents, all the decisions. And it didn't matter what I said. I spent 3 years going in and out of courtrooms trying to explain what I didn't even fully understand. But when the paper trail ends with you, they don't care how it started. A pause. I was sentenced to prison. 5 years. He swallowed. And I'll be honest with you, Judge. I was surrounded by men who made terrible choices. And me? I made one. I trusted the people I loved. He looked up briefly, and in that moment, the room saw a man stripped of all pretense. Not the TV personality, not the businessman, but just a son, a father, a man who had lost his way. When I got out, I held on to one thing, he said quietly. Hope. I thought maybe I could rebuild. Maybe go back to the shop, patch things up. My dad, he was always the anchor. I figured we'd start fresh. He stopped. His throat tightened. But he was gone. Caprio's face softened. I'm sorry to hear that. Rick nodded slowly, blinking away the memory. It was a stroke. They said it happened fast. He passed away alone. I didn't even know until a week later. I was still in a halfway house. Nobody wanted to call me. Nobody knew what to say. He paused, then added almost in a whisper, he died thinking I had become something shameful, and I never got to tell him the truth. Rick nodded, swallowing hard. He had a stroke. They said it was sudden. He died alone. I didn't even know until a week later. Nobody wanted to call me. I was still in a halfway house. The room was silent. The sound of a pen tapping from earlier had stopped. Even the clerk had paused her typing. My father started the shop with me, Rick continued. Everything I did was for him, to make him proud. He worked that counter until his hands shook too much to count change. Rick's voice grew quieter. I don't fear prison. I don't fear being broke. But I do fear that he left this world thinking I had let him down. There was no need for music, no dramatic lighting. The silence said enough. I thought I could start over, he said. I really did. His voice cracked. Not the kind of crack that asked for pity, but the kind that came from walking too far with nothing in your pockets except memories. I got out thinking maybe I could fix what was left. Maybe my boys would talk to me. Maybe one of my old friends would pick up the phone. He paused. They didn't. The courtroom was still. Even the usual shuffling from the clerk's desk had stopped. Judge Caprio didn't speak. He just waited. Rick continued slowly. I tried to get a job. Nothing big. Just at a gas station off Elm Street. Night shift. They said no. Background check. Someone shifted in the back row, uncomfortable. Rick gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I used to appraise things, you know. A pocket watch, a rare coin, a sword from the Civil War. I could look at something and tell you what it was worth in 10 seconds flat. I once held a one-of-a-kind timepiece worth $1 million. He looked down at his hands. These days, I can't even tell you what I'm worth. The room held its breath. Even the courtroom's creaky heating vent seemed to pause for a moment. Rick glanced toward the clerk's desk, then around the room like he was searching for something he'd lost years ago. I don't have anyone waiting outside. No one came with me this morning. I walked here alone, and I'll walk back the same way. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. There's no one to pick me up anymore. At the judge's bench, Caprio still hadn't spoken, but his eyes had softened. His assistant, a young man with a neat tie and a nervous energy about him, leaned in slightly. He was watching Rick with a different look now, less skeptical, more human. Then it happened. The rear door of the courtroom creaked open. The sound was quiet, but in that stillness it rang out like a bell. Everyone turned. A wheelchair rolled slowly through the doorway, pushed by a court officer. Sitting in it was a frail woman, small and pale, her shoulders hunched under a wool shawl. Her hands clutched the sides of the chair. Her gray hair was pinned back, and her eyes, though watery and dim, were searching. When she saw him, she smiled through trembling lips. Ricky. Her voice was thin, but full of something the rest of the courtroom had forgotten how to hold. Rick turned. His knees almost buckled. He blinked, like he didn't believe she was really there. Mama? The room, just moments ago heavy with silence, now pulsed with something else. Something sacred. The quiet tears, the way people leaned forward, the rustle of a tissue. None of it broke the dignity of the moment. She reached out a hand, shaky, barely lifting it from her lap. I told you, I'd never miss your day. Rick let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His face crumpled, not with shame, but with something like relief. Like the moment you realize you're not as forgotten as you thought. Caprio cleared his throat gently. Looks like someone did come for you after all. Rick wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, then gave a sheepish laugh. She's stubborn, he said. She always shows up. There was a warmth in the judge's expression now, quiet and steady. Well, Caprio said softly, we all need someone who does. You know, Caprio began, his voice calm and easy. My mother's name was Philomena. Rick blinked, unsure where the judge was going with this. But he listened. She didn't have much, Caprio continued. Raised 5 kids with barely enough to feed us. But she always told us, when you see someone on the ground, don't ask how they got there, just help them get back up. A quiet laugh rose from the judge's throat, soft and fond. And she never said it gently either. She'd slap the back of your head if you stepped over someone struggling. The courtroom chuckled lightly. Even Rick allowed himself the smallest grin, though his eyes still shone with something raw. Caprio nodded towards the back of the courtroom where Rick's mother sat, silent in her wheelchair. Her hands were folded in her lap, eyes shining behind thin glasses. Your mother reminds me a little of her. Strong women. We're lucky to have them. Rick's throat tightened, but he said nothing. That's why we started a fund, Caprio said, shifting slightly to open a drawer beside him. Named it after her. The Philomena Fund. People donate a little here and there. It's not much. But sometimes, it's enough. He pulled out a crisp $20 bill and a worn 5. He flattened them gently and placed them on the bench in front of him. Here, he said, pushing them forward. For your ride home. Uber's not getting any cheaper these days. Rick stared at the money, then slowly reached for it. His hand shook. Not from pride, but something deeper, something like disbelief. And the fines? Caprio added, gesturing toward the clerk. They're going to be taken care of. All of them. Silence swept through the room again. But this time it felt different. It wasn't empty or stunned. It was reverent. Rick's lips parted, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. Then, finally, in a low voice, he managed, Judge, you've just done more for me than anyone has in the last 5 years. Caprio offered a small smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. Well, he said, you didn't ask for anything. That says something. Rick nodded slowly. His voice cracked just a little. Thank you. The judge leaned forward just slightly, lowering his voice, not to make a show of the moment, but to let the words land softly. One day when you can do the same for someone else, he said. Remember what this feels like, and give it back. Rick nodded again. He folded the bills with care, as though they were more than money, more like a key. Not to a car, but maybe, just maybe to something new. From the benches behind him, someone clapped, once, then twice. It was quiet, hesitant at first, but then others joined. A slow, respectful applause filled the room. No one who had laughed earlier now dared to lift their gaze, because what they saw wasn't a man who had fallen. They saw someone who had stood back up. Judge Caprio tapped his pen once on the bench, and the applause tapered off. He looked down at his paperwork, then back up. Mr. Harrison, he said with warmth, I hope today is a turning point. Rick looked back at his mother. She gave him the smallest nod, eyes full of quiet pride. Then he turned again to the judge. It already is. As Rick walked out of the courtroom that morning, the world didn't look any different. Same streets, same sky, same worn-out shoes on his feet. But something in him had shifted. He carried no certificate, no headlines, no fanfare. Just a quiet moment of dignity restored. Judge Caprio watched him go, then turned back to his bench with a thoughtful sigh. Some stories end in courtrooms, others begin there. A few months later, the morning sun filtered softly through the blinds of Judge Caprio's office, casting warm stripes of light across his desk. It was a slow day, the kind where paperwork outnumbered people. Outside, Providence was easing into spring. You could hear the faint chirping of birds even through the thick courthouse walls. Frank Caprio was reading over a file when his clerk knocked gently and stepped inside, carrying a small package and a white envelope. This just came in for you, Judge, she said with a smile. No return address, just your name, handwritten. Caprio set his reading glasses down and reached for the envelope first. The handwriting was shaky, but careful, deliberate. He opened it slowly, unfolding the letter inside. The first line read, Dear Judge Caprio, I wasn't sure how to begin this letter, so I'll just say thank you. He paused. He already knew who it was from. You probably hear that a lot. But for me, it's not just gratitude. It's something deeper. You didn't just forgive a man with 7 parking tickets. You looked at someone most folks had already stopped seeing. You saw me. That day in court, I didn't expect kindness. I didn't think I deserved it. But you gave it freely. Not because you had to, but because you chose to. I walked out of that courtroom carrying more than a clean record. I carried hope, and for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered. Caprio sat back, the letter resting gently in his hands. I'm writing this now from a youth rehabilitation center in Cranston. I started volunteering here a few weeks after our hearing. I talk to young men who've made mistakes. Some of them are angry, some just lost. But all of them need someone to believe they're not finished. I tell them about you, about what it means to be truly seen. At this point, the clerk had quietly stepped back and closed the door. The office was silent. Caprio continued reading. You reminded me that no matter how far we fall, there's always a door open somewhere. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to hold it. Attached to the letter was a small note, written on a torn corner of lined paper. Just 7 words. This belonged to my father. It's yours now. Caprio turned to the small wooden box still sitting unopened beside the letter. He lifted the lid gently. Inside, nestled in soft cloth, was an old pocket watch. Its brass surface was worn, but the engraving on the back was still clear. For the man who saw me. He held it in his palm. It was heavier than it looked, not in weight, but in meaning. The watch wasn't valuable by any collector's standard. The chain was frayed, and time had long since stopped ticking. But to Caprio, it was priceless. He ran his thumb over the engraving, eyes softening. This wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder of a moment in a crowded courtroom, of a man who walked 5 miles in silence, of 92 cents, of a mother waiting at the door, of a second chance accepted with humility. Caprio placed the watch gently on his desk, next to the photo of his own parents. He leaned back in his chair and smiled, not the kind of smile for cameras or courtrooms, but a quiet one. The kind that grows in the chest and settles behind the eyes. Sometimes, he thought, justice doesn't come in a ruling. Sometimes it arrives months later, in a wooden box with a letter from a man who was once invisible, and now was whole. And that, my friends, is the story of a man who lost everything. His name, his fortune, even his place in the world, but found something far more valuable in a quiet courtroom in Providence. Not just mercy, but recognition. Not just forgiveness, but a reminder that he was still worth something. If this story touched you the way it touched us, let us know in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone saw you, not for your mistakes, but for your effort to stand again? Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe for more real stories that remind us justice isn't only about rules. Sometimes it's about the heart. Thanks for reading. See you in the next story. Dear, stories on this channel are fictional or inspired by real events. They aim to uplift and promote kindness and fairness. Any similarities to real people or events are purely coincidental. We do not promote any political or religious views.